Today is all about mixed media contour portraits. We will start with blind contour drawing and finish with regular contour drawing, focusing on the outer edges using one continuous line. Then we are going to cut and collage our portraits to create a mixed media work of art filled with color and expression. I'm using liquid watercolor, POSCA markers, and my favorite drawing pen. These are examples that my students made, and as usual, they rocked it. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a weekly tutorial. In this quick review of contour drawing, we're going to start with blind contours. As the name implies, you are drawing blind, which means you are looking only at your subject using one continuous line, not picking up your pencil, no erasing, and focusing on the outer edges. Look at how wonky it looks. That is the fun, because if you do an amazing drawing, you can say, oh my goodness, I didn't even look at what I was drawing, and then you have an excuse if it looks like this. Remember, this is a practice exercise all about hand-eye coordination. So you are practicing as if your hand is an extension of your eyeball, and your hand should just mimic and cover the lines that you see outlining with your eye. Let's speed this up and do it again. This time I'm going double speed. And before art teachers, you come at me in the comment sections, I know you're supposed to do this slow. This is a recap of a technique that if you want to go more in depth, click the link above to my full-length contour drawing tutorial. After practicing blind contours, I switched my pen and I'm moving on to modified. A modified contour drawing has all the same rules as before. So one continuous line, don't pick up your pen, even though you're gonna see me do that several times. The reason why is my hand gets in a weird position or cramps up, or I feel like the angle of my pen could be better, and I quickly pick it up and put it back down. So if you see me pick up my pen, you don't need to leave a comment. I'm aware the idea is one continuous line, but you know, I'm not gonna come over through the internet and pop your hand if you lift your pen. So with a modified, again, it's the same rules, except this time you can look at your paper like 10%. So 90% you're looking at the person that you were drawing. There's me picking my pen up again. And then 10% glancing down at like key moments. So for example, when I transition from one body part to the other, like from nose to eye, but this is a modified contour, it might make a little bit more sense visually to how someone actually looks, but you're still practicing that hand-eye coordination, not focusing on the finished result, but focusing on really outlining and tracing what your eye is seeing through your hand with one continuous line. Now I'm moving on to contour drawing, which is where I will be looking at my paper about, I don't know, maybe just 20% of the time. So my goal is to have one continuous line, focusing on the outer edges, all the same rules as before, but this time I do want each of the facial features to be in the right place. It's still a continuous line drawing, so it's still gonna have a little bit of a quirkiness to it. I'm not completely worried so much about proportions. I am looking at spaces, but really I'm focusing on line and thinking of this as like the history of what my eye was looking at as I'm drawing it. Now I'm gonna admit right now that I am cheating. I'm gonna have my students, when they do this technique, they have to look at a live model. There are options if you're really, really shy and your teacher says, okay, get with a partner and draw them. That can be triggering for some students. So there is the option of looking in the mirror, and there's always the option, which, spoiler, I'm looking at a photograph that I Googled. I don't recommend doing that. This is a technique that really encourages drawing from observation. We're so used to looking at flat images on the screen, and this is an opportunity to practice drawing what's right in front of you. However, I'm all alone here in my classroom right now, and I wanted to focus on something that's more expressive. So I'm drawing a young child with their mouth open. You can guess if they're laughing or crying, but since so many of my contour drawings are so neutral, just like a person sitting there with a neutral face, I wanted to have a little bit more expression or emotion, so I selected a photograph from the internet to draw from. Again, I highly recommend direct observation. That is an art form that we really have gotten away from in our modern age, and sitting down and drawing from life is just such a key component to getting better as an artist. I really like this fine pen I'm using because the small little wrinkles in the face, I can really get in those details, and those traveling lines between facial features, those don't stand out as much. So remember, with this style of contour drawing, every time I change to a new facial feature or placement, I'm checking my work to make sure it visually makes sense. Once you have a wide variety of drawings to choose from, it's time to collage them together in a mixed media approach. There's a few options. You could do a watercolor and salt technique. Click the link to get a full breakdown on that. You could also do jelly plate printmaking, which is really fun for creating multiple backgrounds using acrylic paint, watercolor, or tempera. Click the link above for that breakdown. My students are doing the watercolor and salt technique, and here's just a brief preview of how much fun that is. We're using liquid watercolor, and I'll put all my materials in the description box, and they swirl and flow, and then the salt adds a really fun crystallized effect. Once you're happy with your background, it needs to dry, of course, and then you're going to cut out your favorite images to collage and arrange on your paper. They can overlap, they can be a variety of sizes, and I think it'd be really fun to overlap some blind contours in there just to mix things up and keep you on your toes. The arrangement is totally up to you. If you want to focus on composition, if you want to focus on a progression of maybe blind to modified to contour to show like something becoming more realistic. It could be a self-portrait, it could tell a story, or it could simply just be your favorite drawings for whatever reason. I am going to cut out these two and kind of keep them together, and these are my students I do during class. The one with the hat is Ethan. Hi, Ethan. And then the one to the right is Shelby. So I love drawing my students when they're not looking. And I prefer, when I'm arranging this, the vertical composition. You turn your paper any way that makes sense for you, but I'm going to end up using a horizontal orientation simply because in YouTube, that's the way the camera has to be turned and it is easier to film. So although I prefer the vertical for this, I'm rotating mine simply to fill the camera space in a way that's better for you, the viewer. Play around with your arrangement until you're happy, and don't be afraid to overlap and go off the page. We're also going to work back into this, so there will be many opportunities to make this have a more cohesive and unified feel. I'm using my old favorite Modge Podge to attach all of my pieces and also create a sealer over the whole work of art so I can go back in with a variety of mixed media techniques to bring it all together. Use an old paintbrush to attach your pieces because Modge Podge is glue. It's going to ruin your paintbrush if you don't clean it well. So don't use like your favorite painting brush. And you can see I've sped things up quite a bit so that you don't have to watch me glue everything down. But I'm putting a clear coat over all of the drawing materials, and you'll see why that's important soon. Another option, which I did not even think about until I started gluing everything down, was using an X-Acto knife to cut away some of the larger white areas so the background can kind of peek through the subject. So my students here use X-Acto knives to cut out key or interesting areas of their drawings. Then they Modge Podged it down to their colorful paper with really fun and interesting results. Once your Modge Podge is completely dry, it's time to experiment with a mixed media approach. I'm going to be trying out a variety of different materials to achieve cohesiveness and interest in this work of art. Here, I'm taking the same liquid watercolor I used for the background and I'm applying washes over my subjects because I don't want them just stark white. I want them to kind of interact with the background a little bit more than they do, especially because they look kind of blocky, like I just cut them out and glued them down, because that is exactly what I did. So feel free at this point to use whatever materials that you have. You could use a set of watercolors that are not liquid, just like a basic set of praying watercolors. You could overlap with washes of acrylic paint. The options for materials at this point are endless, and showing off your own personal style is encouraged. I'm going to change up my color here and bring in a little bit of green just to give the color scheme a little bit more interest, but also kind of bleed into the background as well. I'm going to speed things up and then let all of this dry, and then I'm going to go in and emphasize those drawing lines that I created at the very beginning. I am using over my dry work of art these POSCA paint markers that my students are obsessed with. I'm starting out with silver and I like it, but it's very subtle. I think I'll come back and use silver kind of at the end for some fine lines and details. So I'm gonna move on to a really thick point and a black POSCA marker. I could do this with a Sharpie, a drawing pen, but I really enjoy, look how bold these lines are. Really satisfying to use, really bold lines. You can smudge it. It goes over smooth over all the materials that I've used. So a win here. My only complaint is my example that I'm making is really small. My students are like 10 times larger than mine. So I think the line is a little bit dominant. It's kind of overtaking some of the more fine lines and details. So keeping that in mind, I'm just going to emphasize some key points, not so much in the facial features, but like the hair, the hats, shoulders, connecting those lines, and I will tone it down a little bit. I like a bold line, I like contrast, but I feel like it's a little bit overpowering. So keeping that in mind, it just depends on the size of your drawing. And going back in and emphasizing key parts of the facial feature is definitely something I encourage because this is a line drawing. So going back in and making those lines, as you see me doing here, stand out, be bold, and just have that effect that you want is a key part of this process. I'm using that same drawing pen I used to create the contour drawings, and it's gliding very well over my dried Modge Podge and over my watercolor paper. A fine point Sharpie works as well. Play around with the materials and see what works for you. Now I'm going to take a silver POSCA marker and I'm going to overlap that into that first black line that I drew. And then that's going to tone down that line and not make it quite so bold. It's gonna just kind of give it the effect of emphasis for sure, but toning it down so it's not completely overtaking the artwork where it's all you're noticing or looking at. Now that I've been focusing on unity and making everything work together, I want to create some areas of contrast that pop and really catch your eye. So I'm using an orange POSCA marker, which is a color very different from the background. And again, creating emphasis in similar areas that I did with the black. And I also think that kind of tones the black down a little bit too. And I could keep it as simple or as complicated I wanted at this point. I could go in with as much detail, I could go in with more paint, but I don't want to take away too much from the line drawings that I created. This has been really fun to play with, and as always, my students did a much better job than me thinking outside the box and pushing themselves. So as you saw in the examples at the beginning of the video, and I'll put some at the end too, there is just so many options to make this work of art capture the spirit of contour drawing, but also your own personal artistic style. Knowing when to stop is always my problem, so I'm going to stop here and trim those edges that have been bugging me with the portraits that kind of stuck off the edge. Once I'm done with that, she's all done. Thank you so much for sticking around and making art with me, and if you're interested in my full-length lesson plans and student examples, find my website, thatartteacher.com. If you want to see what my students are currently up to in my classroom, find me on Instagram at thatartteacher_Machado.